had the state's motion in limine under advisement following a hearing conducted on August 1st, 2024, and having heard and considered the evidence, admitted exhibits, arguments of counsel, defendant's supplemental submission regarding state's motion in limine, and the state's response to defendant's memorandum of law, grants paragraph 1 through 6 over defendant's objection, and grants paragraphs 8 through 12 over defendant's objection. As it relates to paragraph 7, the burden is on the defendant to show a nexus between Odinism, cult or ritualistic killing, Brad Holder, Patrick Westfall, Johnny Messer, Elvis Fields, Ned Smith, Ron Abrams, Kagan Klein, Jerry Klein, Ron Logan, and the murders of the 2 victims. The case law is quite clear that the nexus must not be based on speculation, conjecture, rumors, or hearsay, but rather on admissible evidence. The court finds the defense has failed to produce admissible evidence demonstrating a nexus between Odinism, cult or ritualistic killing, Brad Holder, Patrick Westfall, Johnny Messer, Elvis Fields, Ned Smith, Ron Abrams, Kagan Klein, Jerry Klein, Ron Logan, and the murders. Therefore, the court grants paragraph 7 of the state's motion in limine over defendant's objection. The court will not permit the evidence submitted by the defense in support of their arguments regarding third-party perpetrators in the trial of this cause, as the probative value of such evidence is greatly outweighed by confusion of the issues and its potential to mislead the jury. The court will allow that evidence to support an offer of proof at the trial if one is made by counsel. Jury selection will commence in Allen Superior Court October 14, 2024, with trial commencing in the Carroll Circuit Court concluding November 15, 2024. Paragraph 8 of the state's motion in limine reads, any reference to an investigation conducted by Todd Click, along with any reports or investigative materials from Click that are not relevant or used for the purpose of confusing the issues or has the potential to mislead the jury. Officer Todd Click's investigation into the Delphi murders paralleled and eventually merged with the investigation of Detectives Ferenczi and Murphy. It would be impossible to separate the investigative efforts and findings of these 3 law enforcement officers from one another. To exclude any reference to an investigation conducted by Todd Click is to wholly prohibit and erase the years-long dogged investigations of Detective Murphy and the late Detective Greg Ferenczi. Judge Gull's order granting the state's motion in full, without citing any supporting case law, and outright ignoring the mountains of evidence presented thus far in support of a third-party guilt defense, all but guarantees that the trial of Richard Allen, set to commence on October 14th, will be exactly what we've all feared but entirely expected: a practice run. While Judge Gull's bias against the defense attorneys and her shameless, uncomfortable coddling in favor for the state should come as no surprise by now, it is perplexing that the special judge is so dismissive of the defense's theory of the crime as being ritualistic in nature. After all, Judge Gull's own chief public defender, William S. Libredo, who was in fact briefly appointed to defend Richard Allen after Judge Gull committed structural error and threw his defense attorneys off the case against his wishes, has spoken publicly to news and other media outlets about his belief that the Delphi murders were ritualistic in nature, and that Richard Allen is more likely than not a factually innocent man.
I thought it was hocus pocus. I honestly didn't, I'd never heard of it, and the more I got into it, that's a real thing. It is a real thing, and it's scary.
In what way?
Well, I believe they sacrificed a girl and killed another one. Some of the people that live in Delphi were very brazen about their Odinistic beliefs on their Facebook pages, including the sergeant who was in charge of keeping Mr. Allen safe in Westville.
Sergeant Jones, who was wearing patches that said "In Odin We Trust" on his Department of Corrections uniform. Yep. The judge ordered the warden to make them stop. And then what did you notice?
That Mr. Jones had a tattooed under his right eye. From the best we can tell, it looks a lot like Odin's spear. And he had several tattoos on his forearms, including the interlocking triangles that are on his Facebook post. I got to give credit to Mr. Rosie and Mr. Baldwin that, they picked up on that. confinement officers at the Allen County Jail aren't even allowed to have facial hair, let alone facial tattoos. I was a little miffed that the warden allowed that, or, you know, he even knew what it was.
Do you have an opinion on that?
I do. I don't think Mr. Allen had anything to do with this. I honestly don't.
Is that something you say about all your clients?
No, and rarely do I believe it. But in this particular case, I believe it. 100%.
If an Odinism defense is good enough for Judge Gold's chief public defender, and it's good enough for 3 highly respected and decorated law enforcement investigators who pursued suspects associated with Odinism for over 2 years, and it's good enough for the FBI Behavioral Analysis Unit and for academic and forensic experts of the highest caliber and credentials, what makes Judge Gold qualified to argue? The former prosecutor of Carroll County, Robert Ives, has also stated that he believes that there were signature, ritualistic, and non-secular components of the crime scene.
The crime scene is very unusual. It's all very strange. If you had arrived at this crime scene where the girls' bodies were found, there were 3 or 4 physical characteristics of the crime scene that you absolutely would take pictures of. I hope that people who are handling the investigation will consider whether perhaps it might be time to release some more of that information. In the early days of this investigation, law enforcement, the FBI, the Indiana State Police, the Carroll County Sheriff's Department were looking for crimes in other locations that might have similar characteristics. And even then, the characteristics they were looking for tended to be more general things than the items I'm talking about, but they are very unusual.
You were quoted as saying that the evidence or the crime scene was odd. What do you mean by odd?
It was just not your normal, a person was killed here crime scene. There was a lot more physical evidence than that at the crime scene. And it's probably not what you would imagine, where people think that I'm talking about. And so because of unique circumstances, which all unique circumstances of a crime are a sort of signature, well, this unusual fact might lead to somebody, or that unusual fact might lead to somebody, where sometimes criminals will commit a crime in such a way that it's so distinct that it acts as a sort of signature for them.
Was there a signature in this crime?
I would say there were 2 or 3 things. I'd say at least 3.
Do you think those signature items would still exist?
I think potentially that 1 or 2 of those things could pop up again, yes.
On July 7, 2021, at approximately 2:15 p.m., Detective Greg Ferenczi was shot and killed outside of the FBI Indianapolis resident agency in Terre Haute. A subject drove to the gate of the building and threw a Molotov cocktail at it. The man then confronted Detective Ferenczi and shot him as he came out of the building. Despite being wounded, Detective Ferenczi was able to return fire. An FBI agent also rushed outside and shot the subject, who then drove himself to a local hospital, where he was taken into custody. The subject was subsequently charged with the murder of a federal agent. As a pillar among law enforcement and citizens alike, the senseless, tragic loss of Detective Ferenczi shook the community of Terre Haute and beyond.
This is a federal case. The FBI will have the lead. Greg Ferenczi was a good man, a 30-year member of Terre Haute PD, and worked in this community for many, many, many years. It's a sad day for this community and for the Terre Haute Police Department.
Greg was a 30-year veteran of the Terre Haute Police Department, but he was also one of us, a member of the FBI family. For 11 years, Greg served as a task force officer, later joined our Indianapolis Joint Terrorism Task Force. And to his FBI teammates, Greg was the guy. Greg was whip smart. His coworkers labeled him a secret genius. He was a terrorism expert working in the middle of the Midwest. Greg brought decades of investigative experience, invaluable wisdom, and life lessons.
The murders of Abigail Williams and Liberty German were the result of hatred. Hatred for women, perhaps. Hatred for race traitors. Hatred for the privileged, the elite, the other. But where judges are called upon to serve as a balanced, fair, and impartial foundation, upon which justice may be carried out, Special Judge Frances Gull has allowed hatred to consume her. Hatred for the defense attorneys who were willful and insubordinate, who humiliated her in front of her colleagues and superiors, hatred for her own shortcomings, her own inability to occupy a seat which she has claimed as rightfully hers, hatred for a defendant who has yet to be tried, and despite his fundamental rights to due process and his total presumption of innocence, the special judge held him in maximum security prison in total isolation and torment for over a year. Judge Frances Gull is on a mission. It's a mission she shares with the Unified Command Task Force, with Lieutenant Jerry Holman, with Detective Tony Liggett, with Prosecutor Nick McClelland, Superintendent Doug Carter. Judge Gull is complicit in the conspiracy to convict Richard Allen. We are watching the state of Indiana hang a constitutionally innocent man. The fix is in. And while the state of Indiana conspires to convict Richard Allen, the person or persons who murdered Abby and Libby are free.
What is corruption? It is dishonest or fraudulent behavior, usually perpetrated by those in a position of power or authority. It is a betrayal by those entrusted to protect and serve all, to show favoritism to none, and to safeguard and uphold our inalienable rights to liberty and life. Corruption destroys trust, erodes goodness, and hardens the innocent, who suffer as a result. By its most basic definition, corruption is a departure from what is pure, what is correct, and what is true.
In Fahrenheit 451, novelist Ray Bradbury wrote about what we leave behind when we leave this world. Everyone must leave something behind when he dies, my grandfather said. Something your hand touched some way so your soul has somewhere to go when you die. And when people look at that tree
or that flower you planted, you are there. It doesn't matter much what you do, he said. So as long as you change something from the way it was before you touched it into something that's like you after you take your hands away. The difference between the man who just cuts lawns and a real gardener is in the touching. The lawn cutter might just as well not have been there at all. The gardener will be there for a lifetime. Greg, he was that kind of gardener. His legacy will be what he touched and what he left behind, long after he took his hands away.
So when it comes to corruption, there can be no compromise. It must be exposed and rejected at every turn. We cannot tiptoe toward justice, knocking once or twice, hoping that someone is home. Justice is a door that, when closed, must be kicked in.